Hello, my friends. I'm so glad you hopped back into another video with me, unless this is your first one, and then welcome. But we are in the middle of a theme for the month of March. It is commonly asked questions, and this is one I get once in a while. Usually it's people who are just starting out writing, or they've heard someone says, "Oh, you got to write a book. You have such a great story." But the question is, what if I don't know exactly what my story is about? And let me frame this up a little bit. You probably have gone through something in your life, pretty big, pretty major. You've experienced some stuff. For example, let's just use me as an example, right? I have gone through divorce. For some people, that's a big thing. Some people, it's not a huge thing. But I have gone through that. Or I had my son really young. I got pregnant at 17. That is a story, right? Like I can tell you about that experience in my life. I can tell you, how I dealt with it and how I got there and what I did afterwards and all of that, right? So you have this idea for a story, but how do you make it like a book? How do you make it a thing to share with the world, something of value, something that people want to read, something that feels like it's giving more than just like an interesting story about your life? Because and you've heard me say this before, but one of the reasons why memoir gets kind of a bad rap is like you don't have a lot of new things to say. I don't either. How many people have been divorced? How many people got pregnant young? I mean, these are not uncommon stories. These are not anything spectacular that needs to be splashed out on the front pages. But that, I'm here to tell you and everyone else, that doesn't mean you don't have a valuable story to share. The way you package it is what makes it special and makes it unique and makes it something that your readers will connect with and that will give back to them, okay? That's the tricky part. So that's what I mean when I say I've had clients tell me like, this is kind of my timeline, or this is the big event, or this is the thing that happened in my life, but I don't really know what my story is about. I don't really know what the story is within that event or within those experiences. When we get down to the level of theme and all of that, that's where the story lives, right? So in this instant, you probably know roughly when your story starts and ends. You maybe have this timeline in mind. You maybe have these series of events in mind. For example, if I was telling you my divorce story, it probably wouldn't start when I'm like 14 or 15 or something. Maybe it starts when I meet my ex and, goes through the divorce process, and maybe ends when I'm like single, out on the town or something. So I have an idea of when my story might start and end. But what is it about? That is really the question. This is when we get to the topic of theme and how to find your theme in that book. So let's use the divorce story as an example because it's an easier one to wrap your head around, and we'll just run with what I've been going with, okay? Here's where it gets tricky, because within a story, within that experience in my life, I probably learned a dozen lessons or more, maybe 100, who knows? But the point is, there could be sub-themes upon sub-themes. There could be multiple strings, multiple themes running through it. In my experience, I learned how to love myself. I learned how to forgive myself. I learned how to be a better partner. I learned I learned about love. I learned about parenting. Oh my gosh, I learned so many things about forgiveness. Which one of those is my story? Which one of those is the story, the thread I use to tie my story together? How do I know if it's a theme or a sub-theme, right? So what I like to do in this case is ask my clients or other memoir writers. I like to use my clients as examples because I've gotten into the work with them. I've gotten into the nitty-gritty with them. And I've been able to really help them flesh these things out in real time. So you hear me talk about my clients. But really this will work with anyone. What I like you to do, if you're struggling with identifying your major theme and really where your story lives and what's going to tie your story together throughout, is think about framing it up within the context of a desire, what you want. So we're going to talk about this word desire. And this doesn't work beautifully with every story, but this works pretty well with most stories. So using my divorce story as the example here, in the beginning, my desire was probably something like, oh, I just want to like meet a nice guy and have a happy, fulfilling relationship. You know, my parents were divorced, so I didn't have that, and I want to provide that to my kids. So I want to find a nice guy to have a happy, fulfilling relationship with. That's my desire in the beginning. And then as my story shifts, and this is how you should look at it for your story, how do your desires change? What happens that shifts your desire? Instead of wanting a happy, fulfilling relationship, there might come a time in my marriage where I'm like, okay, I just sort of want out, or I want to, for me it was, I want to feel loved. I want to feel loved. And I originally thought that my ex-husband was going to be the guy to do that. He was going to be the one. I was just waiting around for him to figure it out. And I remember vividly waking up one day and realizing like, oh no, I'm going to be waiting forever. I had to learn to love myself. So my desire shifted from I want a happy, fulfilling relationship to I want to be loved to, oh no, I want to learn how to love myself. I want to learn how to show myself love and find my own value and my own self-worth. That led to the demise of my marriage. I'm not going to take the full blame, okay? But the moment that I turned inward and started loving myself was the moment I felt a bigger shift in the marriage. So then things started falling apart, as they do in most divorce stories. And maybe my desire shifted to like, I just want to be done with it. Like I want to get away from him. I don't want to be married to him anymore, or I don't want to have to deal with him. My divorce lasted 3.5 years, so it was quite long. At a certain point in that story, I remember feeling very like, I just want to know what my life looks like from this point on, because it was such a long transition period. So maybe that's how my desire shifts. I just want normal. I just want to find my new norm. I just want to feel like I know what to expect every day. I don't want to feel on edge. And that brings up another point. Did you hear how I said I don't want? I want you to focus on your desire. How that shifted as what you want, because we're motivated to go after what we want typically. And, you know, of course we're motivated to avoid what we don't want, but avoidance isn't as powerful usually as, you know, wanting to find something that feels like it's fulfilling that desire. So focus on what you do want. And if all you can think of is, I don't want this, what's the opposite of that, right? I didn't want to be in that transition period anymore, which meant I wanted to find my new permanent happy life. So then my desire is going to shift again. Maybe it's going to shift again to like, okay, I found my new happy permanent life and I want this to last forever, right? Maybe that's the end of my story. So what we have in the beginning, remember, is I want a happy, fulfilling relationship. And your desire changes throughout the story. It changes to like, I want love, I want self-love, I want, I guess I would call that stability, maybe, right? I wanted my life to feel stable and predictable and like I knew where it was going. And so it shifted, right? It shifted. But in the end, I just wanted to find happiness and fulfillment. Isn't that kind of the same as the beginning? I kind of wanted happiness and fulfillment, but I looked in my marriage and I learned that I had to find it in myself and what I was doing for a career and all of that, right? So I use this example not because this is how my book is shaped, my own story, although it could be. I just don't know if I want to write about a whole entire book about this guy. Let me know if any of you divorced ladies feel the same way. But I definitely went through a huge personal transformation within that process. So it's absolutely valuable. I just, it comes down to, I don't know if I want to invest emotionally in that right now. Anyway, my point in sharing this with you and getting a little more intimate and personal with you is to illustrate that our desires will shift throughout the book, but it usually ties together. There's usually something that ties it together. And that's how you know what your major theme is. Now, I might say, well, this is a journey of self-love. Okay, maybe it is. Well, it was also a journey of a marriage failing, right? Maybe underlying the love theme, the self-love theme is, oh, I just want to, be a better wife or be a better partner, or I really do want to find a fulfilling relationship. And maybe there's parts of that story or parts of that theme that will pop in and out. But my story would look a lot different if it went from, I want a fulfilling relationship, I don't want a fulfilling relationship with this guy. And if I had like an affair, right? I want a fulfilling relationship with this guy. Oh, well, that's not working. Maybe I want a fulfilling relationship with this guy. So if my theme were to shift and my desire were to shift to, I want a fulfilling relationship, that would be a different vein of story. I would include different experiences and different, different events, and I would frame them differently. I would tell you about maybe the same story about my divorce and how my marriage ended, but I would use a different lens to do that because the theme is different. So you're focusing on your biggest desire, your strongest desire that you can pinpoint throughout your journey. And typically, with stories of, abuse or like addiction and stuff like that, you're going to see a strong survival theme. You're going to see a strong healing theme. Those are okay. That's perfect. That's where your story lives. But within that theme context, within that thematic area, what is the desire that you want? When you start looking for that desire, that's where you're going to find the level where your story lives. Your story doesn't live on the surface of, hey, I battled addiction. It lives underneath the surface of that. Those are the events. That's the vehicle that takes us through your story up on the surface. But underneath, there's a whole lot going on. That's the desire. That's where your story lives. So, I feel like I'm repeating myself now. That's where your story lives. But it is true. This is a conversation I've had multiple times. And I, as you can tell, love talking about this. So please ask questions. This can be tricky to wrap your head around, but typically once you're able to identify the events of your story, the timeline of your story, you can just look at your major themes, try outlining your major themes, listing them out and going like, well, what did I want in this theme? And maybe you don't even look at each scene individually, but you just take kind of a step back and look at your story from, start to finish in a big way like I just did. There's phases, there's stages that your story goes through. And remember, we talked about story shapes and all that. So these are different parts of the shape. These are different parts of the W, right? Or the E. So this is how your story flows and moves, and your desire is going to shift as well. So anyway, back to the ultimate point, using the theme to tie it all together. If this is tricky, think about what you wanted during this time period. If your timeline needs adjusting to allow your desire, your shifting desires to feel more connected, that's sometimes what gets in the way. You think your story ends or starts at a particular spot, and it doesn't, and you need to shift it. So if you're still feeling like, I don't know, this doesn't seem like it's working, try shifting your timeline, adjusting it forward or backwards or shorter or longer. Typically, the longer the timeline, the harder it's going to be to tie it all together. The shorter the timeline, sometimes you feel like there's not a lot of story there, but what happens is you're just not digging down to the nitty gritty where the story lives, okay? So that's today's video. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'm excited to come back and talk about another question that I get similar in vein to what we talked about today. So I will see you in the next one.